Daniel Carter didn't arrive in Brookhaven with loud announcements or dramatic headlines. There were no flashing cameras, no grand opening ceremony. He simply showed up one quiet afternoon, driving a clean black sedan and wearing a calm, confident smile. In a town where most people had known each other since childhood, a new face always caused curiosity. But Daniel didn't look like trouble. He looked successful, trustworthy, the kind of man who knew where he was headed in life. Brookhaven was one of those towns where time moved slowly. People woke up early, drank coffee on their porches, greeted their neighbors, and went to work at local stores, schools, repair shops, and small offices. There were no big dreams here, just simple, honest living. For years, the town had struggled with low wages and limited opportunities. Many people lived paycheck to paycheck. Savings were small. Retirement felt far away. So when Daniel Carter introduced himself as a former Wall Street analyst who wanted to help ordinary people grow their money safely, it was like hearing rain fall after a long drought. He started small, talking to the barber while getting a haircut, buying coffee for strangers at the local cafe, volunteering at community events. He told stories about New York, about financial meetings in tall glass buildings, about people making millions from smart investments. But he also said he was tired of the greed and chaos of the city. He wanted peace. He wanted to give back. Those words meant something in Brookhaven, mostly because people believed him. He rented a small office at the edge of town. Nothing too flashy, just a clean space with a modern desk, a computer, and motivational quotes on the walls. Smart money. Safe future. That was what the sign on his door read. He dressed neatly every day, always wearing a watch that looked expensive, but never bragged about it. He had excellent manners. He listened carefully when people spoke. He remembered names, birthdays, children's names, even small personal stories. That attention to detail made people feel seen, valued, and important. Daniel attended church every Sunday. He sat quietly, bowing his head in prayer, shaking hands with everyone around him. After service, he would stand outside and talk to families, smiling warmly, offering kind words. Within weeks, he was invited to barbecues, dinner parties, and town meetings. Everybody wanted to know him. Everybody felt lucky to have him. One evening, during a local fundraiser at the community hall, Daniel was asked to say a few words. He stood up in front of the crowd, not as a superior but as one of them. He told them that he didn't believe wealth should only belong to the rich. He believed in shared success. He believed in helping hardworking families see their money grow instead of sitting uselessly in low-interest bank accounts. He spoke about investing in stable, future-focused industries like renewable energy, advanced technology, and ethical global markets. The words sounded advanced, intelligent, impressive, but he made them sound simple too. Easy to understand. Safe. That night, people lined up to speak with him. Some were curious. Some were desperate. Some were just hopeful. He didn't push them. He didn't chase them. Instead, he handed out simple business cards and said, "Think about it. This is your choice. Your future." That single sentence made him seem even more honest. The first to take the step was Margaret Lewis, the elderly woman who owned a small bookstore on the corner of Main Street. Margaret had worked her entire life. She had no children, no big dreams, just enough saved up to live quietly in her last years. Daniel explained the low-risk investment to her in gentle terms. He showed her neat papers, charts, and clean-looking reports. He didn't ask for much, just a small starting amount. Margaret signed. A month later, a letter arrived at her home showing that her money had increased by 15%. She stared at the numbers in shock. She walked into her bookstore and told the cashier, who told a customer, who told another customer, and within days half the town had heard how Daniel Carter had helped Margaret Lewis make money in her sleep. That's how legends are born. Within 3 months, Daniel Carter became one of the most respected men in Brookhaven. Teachers invested money meant for their kids' college. Families invested emergency savings. Retired couples invested pensions. Even the mayor quietly put some money into Daniel's hands. But Daniel never acted rushy or greedy. He always said, "Only what you can afford, and only if you're comfortable." He started mailing monthly statements showing growth. Clean documents. Neat numbers. Everything looked professional. Everything looked real. And in the small world of Brookhaven, reality is what you see, what you touch, and who you trust. And Daniel Carter had become the most trusted man there. Behind that perfect image, though, was nothing but darkness and deception. There were no real investments, no Wall Street connections, no green energy companies or tech startups. There was only Daniel, a printer, a computer, and a very dangerous plan. The money he received from new investors was quietly used to pay profits to older investors. This made the lie look even more believable. Each success story brought in new victims. Each smile in the town fed his deception. But at this stage, no one knew the truth. In their eyes, Daniel Carter was not a criminal. He was a miracle worker, a hero, a symbol of hope in a world that had given them very little to hold on to. And sometimes, the most dangerous villains are not the ones who break in through the back door at night. They are the ones invited in through the front door with a warm smile and a friendly handshake. After Daniel Carter had settled into Brookhaven and gained the trust of its people, something began to shift in the town's energy. It wasn't loud or dramatic at first. It was subtle, almost invisible, like the first warm breeze before summer arrives. People started talking about the future in a way they hadn't in years. Not about getting by, but about finally getting ahead. Daniel Hudson hadn't just walked into their small town with promises of wealth. He had walked in with hope, and to people who had lived their entire lives struggling, hope was more powerful than money itself. Margaret Lewis was the first to talk openly about it. At her tiny bookstore, she mentioned how her investment had grown in just 1 month. She said it with hesitation at first, unsure if it was real. But as the statements kept coming, neatly printed and carefully prepared, her hesitation turned into quiet excitement. Then excitement turned into confidence. She had lived alone for so long that any small joy was something she wanted to share. And she shared it with everyone who walked through the bell-ringing door of her shop. Soon after, Rachel Thompson found herself sitting in Daniel's clean little office. Rachel was a single mother in her early 30s with tired eyes and a heart full of worry. Her daughter, Emily, had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition. The medical bills had stacked up like bricks, each one heavier than the last. Rachel worked 2 part-time jobs and still barely managed to keep their small apartment. When she heard about Daniel from a friend, she almost didn't believe it. It sounded too good to be true. But desperation has a way of quieting doubt. Daniel had offered her coffee, listened to her entire story without interrupting, and spoke in a soft, reassuring voice. He told her that what he offered wasn't magic. It wasn't gambling. It was just smart planning, safe and calculated. He said her money could grow enough to help cover future treatments for Emily. He looked toward a framed photo on his desk of a young girl he claimed was his niece and said, "Children deserve a future." That line broke something open in Rachel. She trusted him. She gave him every dollar she had saved over the last 5 years. Then there was James Miller, a truck driver who had spent most of his adult life on the highway. James didn't trust easily. Life had taught him that. He had lost friends, lost sleep, and lost time with his family because of his job. But when he saw Margaret's results and heard other people talking about profits, a temptation began to grow inside him. He thought of his aching back, his tired hands gripping the wheel every night, and a small voice inside him whispered, "What if there's another way to live?" James went to Daniel as a skeptic. He asked sharp questions. He wanted details. Daniel smiled and calmly explained the long-term strategy, the low-risk approach, and the diversified portfolio. He showed numbers, charts, and years of experience. In the end, it wasn't the talk of profit that convinced James. It was the way Daniel made him feel respected, like he was a man making a wise decision, not a desperate one. So James handed over the money he had saved for more than 20 years. Soon, the stories multiplied. The Johnson family invested to send their son to college. The Andersons invested so they could finally travel after retirement. Even the local school secretary put in a small sum, hoping to fix her leaking roof. It was no longer just an investment plan. It was a town-wide dream. Conversations in grocery stores changed. Instead of, "How are you getting by?" people asked, "What are you planning to do when the next return comes?" Smiles were wider. Laughter was louder. For the first time in a long time, Brookhaven didn't feel like a dead-end town. It felt like a place on the edge of something big. Daniel fed that feeling carefully. He sent handwritten thank you notes after each investment. He hosted small financial awareness evenings at the community hall, giving simple talks and answering everyone's questions. He never acted like a rich man. He dressed modestly. He drove the same car. He kept his office simple. That made people feel like he wasn't taking their money for luxury. He was working for them. Every month, envelopes arrived at homes across Brookhaven. Inside were statements showing growth, steady, consistent, impossible to argue with. 10%, 15%, sometimes more. Families gathered around kitchen tables, staring at numbers with disbelief and happiness. People hugged. Some cried. Some prayed in thanks. They didn't realize something important. The money they were seeing wasn't making more money. It was simply the money of others, moving in a circle of lies. New investors unknowingly paid the profits of the earlier ones. It was a perfect illusion. A quiet, well-oiled machine built on trust, hope, and ignorance. And it worked because Daniel understood something very dangerous. People don't just give money to an idea. They give money to a dream. And once that dream is planted, they will defend it, even when warning signs begin to appear. For a long time, no one wanted to question Daniel, because questioning him meant questioning their own dreams. And in that beautiful, fragile phase of hope, Brookhaven didn't realize it was walking deeper and deeper into a trap that had already been set long before Daniel Carter ever stepped into town. You said. At first, everything in Brookhaven looked perfect. The town was calmer, happier, almost glowing. People smiled more often. Stress seemed to disappear from faces that once looked tired and worried. The cafe was busier. The shops were more alive, and conversations were no longer filled with desperate complaints about bills or debt. Daniel Carter had created a false spring in the middle of a long financial winter. But what the people of Brookhaven didn't know was that beneath the blooming surface, the ground was already cracked and poisoned. The success he showed them was not real. It never was. There were no powerful companies growing their money. There were no secret meetings with wealthy investors. No smart market decisions. No financial miracles. Behind Daniel's office door, there was only a laptop filled with fake charts, printed documents carefully designed to look official, and a folder full of names and numbers belonging to people who trusted him with their lives. Every profit that appeared in someone's mailbox was taken from another person's hopeful investment. Money moved in a dark circle, like a snake eating its own tail. When Margaret Lewis opened her statement and saw her money had increased, she smiled with relief. What she didn't know was that the rise in her account came from Rachel Thompson's savings. When Rachel later saw her own numbers climb, that money came from James Miller. It was a chain built without anyone's knowledge, and Daniel was the only person standing at the center of it. And that's how the illusion stayed alive. But lies, no matter how carefully built, always carry a weakness. They need silence. They need time. They need everyone to keep believing. And in Brookhaven, the first tiny crack began in the mind of one quiet, observant man named Thomas Reed. Thomas was not an emotional man. He was an accountant. He lived by numbers, not feelings. He didn't rush into excitement like others did. When his sister showed him her investment statement from Daniel, he didn't smile. He stared at it too long. He noticed the wording, the formatting, the patterns in the numbers. Something didn't feel right. He didn't accuse Daniel right away. Instead, he asked gentle questions. He asked his sister where the companies were based, what projects they were working on, who their partners were. She couldn't answer. She just trusted the numbers because everyone else did. That night, Thomas sat at his computer and searched for the companies Daniel claimed to be investing in. He typed name after name into search engines and business databases, and nothing came up. No websites, no records, no mentions in financial news, no addresses, just empty digital space where real companies should have been. A chill ran through him. At the same time, other small things started to feel strange. One retired couple asked Daniel if they could withdraw a small portion of their profits to repair their home. Daniel smiled and agreed, but then came the delay. Just a processing issue. Then another delay. A temporary freeze in one of the accounts. His responses were still polite, still smooth, but there was something new behind his eyes. Nervousness. Rachel began calling him more frequently. Emily's surgery was getting closer. She needed the money he had promised would be available. Daniel reassured her again and again, but now he avoided giving firm dates. James noticed a change too. When he visited Daniel's office, the door was locked more often than before. The neat desk now seemed cluttered. The air, once calm, now felt heavy. The web of lies was beginning to vibrate, and the spider at the center could feel it. Daniel knew this system could not last forever. He had used the same trick before, in other places, under other names. Different towns, different faces, same lie. He always stayed just long enough to drain hope dry, and then disappear like smoke. This time, he had pushed it too far. Brookhaven had trusted him too deeply, taken him in too completely. As Thomas kept searching, his concern turned into certainty. These weren't normal investments. They weren't even risky investments. They were imaginary investments. He gathered documents, copies of statements, emails, and carefully made his way to a federal hotline to report possible fraud. While the town still lived in its dream, Daniel stopped sleeping. He started watching people through his office window, wondering who was getting suspicious. Every conversation felt like a threat. Every phone call felt like the end. His charm began to crack. The smooth voice replaced by sharp replies, rushed sentences, missing smiles. The man who once felt like hope now felt like a stranger. And then one morning, a small delivery driver noticed something unusual. Daniel's office lights were off. All day. No movement. No car. No curtains shifting. Just silence. People began whispering. Quiet at first, but panic was already working its way through the town. Rachel stood in front of a locked door, calling his name. James knocked harder than he ever had in his life. Margaret simply stood across the street, clutching her bag, her eyes wide as the terrible realization began to rise in her heart. Daniel Carter had not just stepped away. He had begun to run. And that's when the town understood the most painful truth of all. The success that once made them feel alive had never existed. It was a shadow, a carefully painted picture on a wall that was now starting to crack and fall, revealing nothing behind it at all. Their money was never growing. Their future was never secured. In the small town of Riverton, people were slowly starting to realize that something was not right. For the first time in years, whispers of doubt were spreading instead of excitement. The easy profits that had once seemed guaranteed now felt like a fading dream. But Michael Carter was not ready to give up. He had built his empire on deception, and he was willing to do anything to keep it standing. Michael sat alone in his downtown office late one night, staring at the city lights through the tall glass windows. The building no longer felt like a symbol of success. Now it felt like a trap made of steel and glass. On his desk were dozens of unopened emails, most of them from investors asking the same question: when will I receive my return? He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. His heart was racing, but his face stayed calm and focused, as if he were planning a new business deal instead of preparing to save himself from disaster. Across town, Emily Ross was sitting at her kitchen table, looking over the documents she had received from the anonymous email again and again. The numbers didn't make sense. The transfers, the account names, the hidden companies, everything led back to one name: Michael Carter. Emily was not the kind of person who liked trouble, but she had lost nearly all her savings to Michael's investment program. She had trusted him with her future, and now she felt betrayed and angry. That anger gave her courage. She picked up her phone and dialed the number of her old college friend, Jake Malone, who was now an investigative journalist in Chicago. "Jake, I need help," she said, her voice shaking. "What's going on, Emily?" he asked. "You won't believe this. Michael Carter is running a fake investment plan. I think it's a massive fraud, and I can prove it." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "If you're right," Jake said slowly, "this could be the biggest story of my career. Send me everything you have." Over the next few days, Emily sent Jake documents, bank records, and screenshots of emails from Emily and other investors. Jake worked all night, tracing transactions and calling former employees of Carter Financial Group. One name kept appearing again and again: Daniel Abbott. Daniel had once been Michael's right-hand man. He managed accounts and handled investor communication, but he had quit suddenly 2 years ago and moved to Portland without a trace. Jake finally tracked him down at a small coffee shop in Oregon. "You worked for Michael Carter," Jake said as he sat down across from him. Daniel's face went pale. "I don't talk about that anymore," he replied. "But you should," Jake said calmly. "People lost everything because of him. You might be the only one who can expose the truth." Daniel looked around nervously and lowered his voice. "It was all fake," he admitted. "The profits, the reports, the companies, they weren't real. Michael created fake charts and fake business partners. We were told to lie to investors every day. If anyone questioned him, he cut them off or threatened to destroy their reputation." "Why didn't you report him?" Jake asked. "Because he scared me," Daniel answered. "He knows powerful people. At least, that's what he wanted us to believe." Jake nodded slowly. He could see the guilt in Daniel's eyes. But guilt was not enough. He needed proof. Meanwhile, Michael Carter was preparing his next move. He wasn't planning on being caught. He had already started moving money into offshore accounts under different names. One of those names belonged to a woman no one had heard of before, Laura Bennett. Laura Bennett was actually Michael's former girlfriend who now lived in Miami. She had no idea that her name was being attached to millions of dollars in stolen money. When Laura saw a strange bank notification appear on her phone, she went straight to her bank. "I think there's been a mistake," she said to the bank manager, Olivia Harding, showing the screen. "I've never seen this much money in my life." Olivia's expression turned serious. "Who deposited this money?" she asked. Laura hesitated. Only one name came to mind: Michael Carter. The bank immediately froze the account and contacted authorities. At the same time, in Riverton, police officer Mark Reynolds was beginning to get several complaints about Carter Financial Group. People were coming to the station in tears. They had lost college funds, retirement money, even mortgages on their homes. Mark had trusted Michael himself. They had played golf together, attended the same charity events. The thought that his friend could be behind all this made him feel sick. Mark decided to visit Michael personally. "You're getting a lot of attention lately," Mark said as he walked into the office. Michael smiled, but his eyes were cold. "That's what happens when you're successful, Mark. People get jealous." "These aren't rumors," Mark replied firmly. "These are real people with real losses. I need to see your records." Michael stood up slowly. "You don't have the authority to barge in here and demand my private files." "Actually, I do now," Mark said, placing a document on the table. It was a warrant. For the first time in 10 years, Michael Carter felt truly afraid. Meanwhile, Jake published the first part of his investigation. The article spread across the internet in hours. The title was impossible to ignore: "The Man Who Built a Fortune on Lies. The Truth Behind Carter Financial Group." Suddenly, former investors, ex-employees, and silent victims started coming forward. Each story was worse than the last. Michael tried to do damage control. He released a public video, standing in front of the American flag in his office. "These are lies," he said with a confident voice. "I'm being targeted by enemies who want to destroy my success." But people could see the panic in his eyes. That same night, as he packed a suitcase in his luxury apartment, a knock echoed through his door. It was slow, heavy, official. When he opened it, 2 federal agents and Officer Mark Reynolds stood outside. "Michael Carter," one of them said, "you are under arrest for fraud, theft, and money laundering." His world finally collapsed. But the biggest twist was still waiting to be revealed, and no one in Riverton was prepared for what they would discover next. The town of Riverton had never been so quiet. The streets that once buzzed with hope and new businesses now felt heavy with shame and disbelief. Michael Carter, the man people had trusted for 10 years, was gone from his office, his apartment, his public life. His name was now spoken in anger, confusion, and regret. Inside a cold police interrogation room, Michael sat with his hands cuffed, his dark suit wrinkled, his confident posture gone. Across the metal table sat Detective Sarah Whitman, a serious woman known for breaking the toughest criminals. "You fooled an entire town," Sarah said, sliding photos of victims across the table. Elderly people, single parents, young couples. Did any of these people matter to you? Michael stared at the pictures, but said nothing. "You didn't just steal money, Michael," she continued. "You stole futures. You destroyed families." A small smirk formed on his lips. "They wanted to get rich fast. I just gave them what they asked for." Sarah leaned forward. "You didn't give them anything. You took everything." Down the hallway, Officer Mark Reynolds stood near the door, listening. Every word felt like a knife in his chest. He remembered the parties, the laughs, the handshakes with Michael. The thought that he had once trusted this man made him feel sick. In another room, Emily Ross sat with Jake Malone, watching the interrogation through a one-way mirror. "I don't recognize him anymore," Emily whispered. "Or maybe I never knew him at all." Jake nodded. "You're looking at the real Michael Carter now." But the story was not finished yet. As investigators began digging deeper into Michael's files, they made a shocking discovery. Carter Financial Group was only a cover. Hidden behind it was an even bigger network. Michael wasn't working alone. There were names, bank accounts, shell companies, and foreign contacts tied to different states: Nevada, Florida, New York, even overseas. "This isn't just fraud," one agent said. "This is a full criminal network." One name stood out the most: Robert Gaines. Robert Gaines was an American businessman with a clean public image and connections to large investment firms. He had been seen at events with Michael many times, but no one suspected him. He had donated to charities, spoken at universities, and was known as a financial genius. When authorities visited his penthouse in Los Angeles, Robert looked almost amused. "You can't be serious," he said, offering them a drink. "Michael Carter is a liar. I barely know him." But when they searched his computer, they found messages, contracts, and secret transfers proving his involvement. Robert Gaines was the real mastermind. Michael Carter had only been the front man. The twist sent shockwaves through the country. News channels exploded with headlines: "Investment scam larger than first believed. Powerful businessman linked to national fraud scheme. Thousands more victims come forward." Riverton was only the beginning. Back at the station, Michael was informed of Robert's arrest. "You knew this day would come," Sarah said. "He promised he'd protect me," Michael whispered, more to himself than to her. "He said I'd be untouchable." "No one is untouchable," she replied coldly. Meanwhile, Laura Bennett sat in a Miami cafe, staring at the ocean. Her world had turned upside down when she learned her name had been used for illegal accounts. She had spent days with lawyers and investigators trying to clear her name. "What if they don't believe me?" she said to her attorney, David Klein. "They will," David replied. "You came forward. That's what matters." Laura exhaled slowly. She had once loved Michael. That thought haunted her. How could she have fallen for someone who was capable of doing all this? Back in Chicago, Jake Malone began writing again. But this time, it wasn't just an article. It became a book, a warning to the world. Every page was filled with names of victims, lies that had fooled them, and the heavy price of trust in the wrong hands. Emily Ross helped organize a support group for the victims. Every Thursday evening, people gathered in the town hall, sharing their stories and pain. "I lost my savings. I had to pull my kids out of college. I lost my home." But something else grew from that pain: unity. Together, they fought for justice. The court case lasted months. Evidence after evidence was presented. Witnesses testified. Daniel Abbott finally stood in front of the judge, telling the whole truth about how Michael had forced him to lie and how Robert had funded the entire operation from the shadows. When it was Michael's turn to speak, the entire courtroom fell silent. "I did what I had to do," he said quietly. "I wanted more. I wanted power, and I got addicted to it." "And the victims?" the judge asked. Michael paused. For a moment, his face showed something close to regret. "I forgot they were real people. That sentence echoed through the courtroom. In the end, justice came. Michael Carter was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Robert Gaines received 40 years for leadership in organized financial crime. Their luxurious lives were gone. Months later, Riverton slowly began to heal. New businesses opened, built on honesty and real work. A community fund was created to support those who had lost the most. Emily was asked to run it. She accepted, determined to make something good out of the darkness. One evening, as Emily walked past the empty Carter Financial building, she stopped and looked up. It was no longer a symbol of lies. It was a reminder that not everything that shines is real. That trust is powerful, and that the truth always finds a way to the surface. And in a small prison cell miles away, Michael Carter finally understood the one truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding. You can fool a town for a while, but you can't fool the truth forever.